This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
Welcome to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with erstwhile Poet Laureate Rich Michelson.
Yeah, he does that every time. Hi, so my guest today, I'm happy to have with me Richard Hoffman, one of our country's great memoirists and poets. And here, because tomorrow you will be at the Right Angles Conference in South Hadley at Mount Holyoke College, Willits Hollowell Hall. That's a great conference. Have you ever been there before?
I've been there before, maybe about eight or 9 years ago.
And that's really writers, organized by writers, for writers. Mm-hmm. It's a full day. You can go to their website, Right Angles Conference. That's WRITEANGLES conference.com. You'll see the whole day of events, panels, readings. Wonderful. You're doing a panel on memoir writing. I know you're with Elizabeth Pryor at Smith College and my friend John Elder Robeson, who has written some great memoirs on.
Looking forward to meeting him.
He's very interesting.
That's a very distinguished and accomplished panel.
Yeah, and you're there. And Richard, we're going to talk poetry, but I want to start out because you're here for memoir writing. I want to start out. I thought of you just a couple of days ago. When I was reading Diana Nyad, I think of you all the time, but when I was reading Diana Nyad's op-ed there in the New York Times about her old coach and sexual abuse, and your incredible memoir, Half the House, you went after an old baseball coach, a Little League coach. This is a subject you tackled 25 years ago. Your coach was brought to justice. What's it feel like now with all this swirling again around you? Yeah.
To be perfectly frank, it's a little discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little discouraging that people are coming to this so late. I feel like someone who exhausted himself, jumping up and down, waving, yelling, asking people to pay attention to this 27, 28 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And went on to do that in various venues and on different task forces and et cetera. And people still profess to be shocked. And
is this a watershed moment, though? Finally,
I certainly hope
think?
so. Well, yeah, I certainly hope so.
Mm-hmm.
How hard was that to do 28 years ago, to come out and say, this is what happened to me, this is how I was abused?
Well, it was difficult. But it was. I did it in the context of that book, which, it's become notorious because of that. It's what Miwash says. In a room in which people are keeping a conspiracy of silence, a single word of the truth sounds like a pistol shot, and that was essentially what happened. But then people go back to business as usual. Course, and it was difficult, but it was in a way. You said you went after this coach. I really didn't. I simply refused to change his name, and he was a part of the story. And in a way, that's the larger lesson that sometimes is missed, is that this is a part of a normal American boyhood. This is not some strange anomaly that only happens to a few people. And now that certainly has tumbled out through the scandals in the Catholic Church and elsewhere. And people are beginning to understand that's a feature for, what the statistics say, 1 in 6 boys.
All right. The book is Half the House. I really recommend it. And your following memoir, Love and Fury, one of the greatest memoirs I've ever read.
Well,
but again, what you're doing is, and there, you touch on the incarceration of black men, your grandson, whose father was incarcerated. You talk about sexual mores from really life is just opened up through by telling your story. And I'm wondering, in your poetry also, you're writing about your life quite often. Your new book is just absolutely amazing, Noon Until Night. And and I'm wondering how you decide to tackle a subject in memoir versus poetry. And I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about that while I say that you're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with Rich Michelson. My guest is Richard Hoffman, who will be at the Right Angles Conference tomorrow at Mount Holyoke College. So, Richard, tell us a little bit. I mean, the difference between your memoir and your poetry. They're both based on your life.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, I would say the memoir is certainly situated in relation to memory. And I think a good memoir is a book about the writer's encounter with memory. I mean, it's not really a documentary form.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a report of what happened. It's an encounter with your memory, which is full of holes and uncertainties and complications. And wrestling with all of that is the way that you make art of it. Often poems start for me, and you could certainly speak to this, Rich. They start with an encounter with language,
Right.
not so much an encounter with memory or even a subject. They start with a kind of instigating word or phrase that then you begin to doodle with, and then you see, where does it connect to my experience? At some point, it tells you what it's trying to be and what it's trying to say.
I'd love the opportunity for our listeners to hear some of your work. Could you read a poem from your latest book?
Well, I think I'll read one
Noon
that...
Until Night. It's a beautiful book, by the way, and write down that title, folks. Noon Until Night. Richard Hoffman, and he will be out Mount Holyoke College tomorrow at the Willits Hollowell Center in South Hadley.
Well, this is a poem that really is a tiny shard of memoir called Shoes. My mother cut holes in her shoes so her corns would stick out, not torment her, standing all day in a mill folding woolen sweaters. Her shoes stank. They were ugly. Twin lobsters in a tank at the market. Laces, defeated antennae, children tapping at the glass, saying, "Ew." And she cut linoleum to cover from inside the holes in the soles, because those were the only shoes she could bear to wear to work, and because she needed to work. And she soaked her feet in the evening and smoked and listened to the radio and imagined walking where?
That's Richard Hoffman from his book Noon Until Night. Richard will be at the Right Angles Conference tomorrow at Mount Holyoke College. He'll be talking about his memoirs, Half the House and Love and Fury. In my mind, two of the greatest memoirs that have been written in my generation. We have a minute left. Put us out with a poem.
Well, this is a poem that's a little bit different flavor, not based in memory. It's called Rune. A day nears, feast of a saint unborn, unlike our forebears or any we have known. We know how dark our powers kept in darkness, a broken lock, a stopped clock, masks and lies. When we wake that unexampled day, will we believe ourselves free or broken?
Richard Hoffman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Rich.
This is
Pleasure
Rich
to be here.
Michelson at NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio.
Not bad, Rich. Not bad.